Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk, the podcast where we break down storytelling across books, television, and film with a special love for book-to-screen adaptation. Here, we talk about craft, character arcs, structure, dialogue, visual language, and the creative choices that shape how a story lands. If you like thoughtful conversational deep dives into the stories you can't stop thinking about, you're in the right place. Let's talk. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am very excited to record this episode. It's going to be a very long one. I have written multiple pages on the character of Yuna Hollander from Heated Rivalry, Shane Hollander's mother, and a character that I have seen a lot of discourse on since the show aired, and people who have read the book, people who haven't read the book, they all have varying opinions on Yuna and her relationship to Shane, and all of it I find very interesting, and I wanted to do sort of a deep dive into my interpretation of her character, my feelings about her parenting style, her dynamics with Shane, her dynamics with David, how Shane is very much influenced directly by Yuna, and so understanding Yuna allows you to understand Shane better, and all of those things were very wordy, so I figured I would sit down and record my thoughts and put it into a formal podcast episode for people to listen to if they are so interested. So, understanding Yuna's arc, I think it's important to recognize that we get context from the source material, which is the book Heated Rivalry. Then we get the context provided in the show and the scenes that Yuna is in during the show. And then the third element that I consider is where, as a viewer and someone who is partaking in both the book and show medium, you can draw inferences and fill in gaps based on what we do know and the concrete evidence we do have. And so I certainly have done that with my interpretation of her character. That is not to say that my opinion is the only one that has merit. I think that you can interpret all of these characters through your own lens, and that's what makes them so compelling. So my interpretation admittedly has a lot to do with my personal experiences in the sport of hockey and a lot of the parenting that takes place in the sport of hockey or in sports in general. But again, I'm drawing from both the book, the show, and then using my own experiences to fill in some of the gaps that show up here and hopefully build a broader picture of the character. So Yuna Hollander has largely built her son. She is the architect of Shane's life by the time we meet him in episode 1, and she understands better than anyone that given her race and Shane's mixed race background, that Shane has to work twice as hard to be half as visible. And she understands that his talent alone cannot protect him from being looked at under a microscope and held to different expectations. She knows that his hockey excellence does not and will not insulate him in the same way, especially in a sport like hockey, which is so white. And that would have made her grateful that he has his father's last name, something that Shane mentions to Rose in episode 4. And he states quite candidly that his last name did offer him protection from the kids who were bullying and teasing his other Asian teammate. So it's no surprise that one of the ways that Yuna loves Shane is by anticipating the world around him and trying to outpace it. And she is trying to manage his anxiety by eliminating obstacles and hurdles that might trigger it for him. That would present like absolute protection, but ultimately would lead Shane to not be able to manage his own emotions and anxiety fully, which we do see play out on screen. Yuna's belief system is based on the notion that control equals safety, which is exactly what we see Shane embodying throughout this entire series. Yuna handles Shane's anxiety by taking action, by planning, by solving problems, And we see David approach it differently. He is much more steady, quiet, stable. He encourages Shane to talk about his emotions and work through them. And that's something that is a mirror to how Ilya helps Shane within their dynamic as their relationship develops. But by doing that, Yuna largely makes herself almost indispensable to Shane. He relies upon her for so many facets of his life, and that makes her role as mother synonymous with management quite often. And so when Shane's career takes off, she would be clocking out of her first job as mom and clocking into her second, which would have been building Shane a future that she knows will last longer than his career as a professional athlete. That means putting the right opportunities in front of him, setting him up for long-term success. She has planned that through the brands that he works with, through the contracts that he signs. And since Shane is largely a shy, quiet, sometimes awkward at times young man, she took over that responsibility and that representative part for him, which puts her largely in control over the way that Shane is pitched and presented to the world around him from the time he's quite young. What Yuna doesn't see is that in constructing Shane's safety, she has also constructed a very specific framework for him to operate within, one with very clear rules and a lot of fear that he would feel around it, because it's a framework that feeds into the need for unparalleled discipline, for a don't rock the boat, keep your head down type of attitude, which mirrors that of hockey culture for sure, but also is representative of his Asian background as well. And he would be trying to chase this standard his whole life, and every time he would reach one peak, another goal within his career or socially would be presented to him, and that would be compounded by the fact that the image created for him falls within a very masculine, straight archetype that hockey has always pushed within its culture. And so as Shane would be going through this process of self-discovery that we see playing out in the show, that would become a standard that Shane knows he will always fall short on. Shane being lonely or isolating himself could be viewed as okay, so long as it makes Shane feel regulated and he says it's helping him with his performance. And so him isolating, not being able to form close friendships with people, those behaviors would all seem like necessary constructs for him to survive and feel safe. And so for Yuna, that's all she's ever wanted for Shane, is for him to feel and be safe. So by the time we meet Shane in episode 1, Yuna is involved in every decision that he makes. She knows everything going on in his life, everything that matters to him, or so she thinks. In the first scene where Shane and Yuna and David are having lunch, we can see how Yuna and David are positioned as Shane's primary and only support system. That's shown visually. He's centered in the frame between them, and he starts to talk excitedly about YouTube, and Yuna pivots the conversation to hockey, while David tries to encourage Shane to talk about something that he's been doing in his free time outside of the sport. And this scene effectively showcases their differing approaches to parenting Shane. So where David tries to talk to Shane about anything but his hockey career, Yuna always dives headfirst into it. We can also see in that scene how Ilya is framed as a threat by Yuna, since he is Shane's rival. And Ilya is someone who increases risk with the way he talks, with the way he's positioned himself against Shane in the scoring race, with the way he's perceived as a ladies' man. And so for Yuna, hating Ilya is partaking in that narrative, yes, but it would also feel like a form of protection to try and keep Shane and his image away from this person who embodies everything Shane is not and is trying not to be like. Outside of the business end of things, if Shane ever implied to her that he had been triggered by Ilya, then naturally Yuna would take that and run with it. At the MLH Awards, we can see how David is much more relaxed in that awards environment, while Yuna is standing and conversing with people there. And it's showing us how she's always an extension of Shane, wherever they go. You can infer that she is talking to this person about him, trying to put him in a better standing somehow, discussing the season or next season. And that sort of pressure is like a pressure cooker for someone like Shane, because he'd be wondering what is being said about him as a player and what he would need to adhere to or accomplish next. He is also so young at this point in the story, so it is not abnormal at all for Yuna to be trying to make sure that Shane's career is starting off in a way that best positions him for the rest of his career. We see that while Shane is at the Olympics, Yuna is texting Shane, reminding him that he needs to be wearing his Reeboks again. So even though Yuna's not on our screen here, that pressure that Shane would be feeling to maintain this standard that Yuna is pushing on him, it's obvious. She texts him, "Is everything okay? Don't forget to wear your Reeboks," when he's in another country competing for the Olympics, and that's what she's worrying about, and so therefore Shane has to worry about it too. When Shane chooses to ignore her text and send a message to Ilya instead, it's one of the few times we see Shane's priorities shifting away from appeasing his mother, and it shows us that he's growing up and he's becoming his own person independent of her, but her being in a managerial role as well as his mother blurs a lot of the lines in that relationship development. In the opening montage of episode 4, we see Yuna on set with Shane during a commercial shoot for an orange soda brand, and this scene in particular is a really great metaphor for Shane's persona not aligning with him as a person. And we know that Shane almost exclusively drinks ginger ale, so aligning himself with this brand is strictly for the contract and the paycheck, and less about choosing a brand that aligns with who he really is and what he represents. Yuna managing his life in this way and putting him into all of these advertising opportunities is another example of how Shane has very little control over his personal life, but that it's not entirely due to Yuna herself, because Shane still has not learned how to say no at this point or how to create a boundary. And so it's easy to pin Yuna as this career-driven mom manager, but Shane is also not willing to risk disappointing her. So she would not know that her behavior is affecting him negatively because Shane has never said as much to her. During the second scene where David, Yuna, and Shane have lunch in episode 4, Shane is not acting like himself because this is coming on the heels of the tuna melt scene. And Yuna notices this immediately. He is tight in his body, short in his responses, and it's the first time we've ever seen Shane behave in this way with his parents. And it's because of Ilya, yes, but also in part due to the pressure that Yuna helped create. She's telling him about the Rolex deal, the expectation that he be in the box for Wimbledon, and for the first time, Shane is expressing that he might want to do something for himself with his limited free time over the summer. He only gets 2 weeks off, and he might not want to check a box and be the face of diversity and inclusivity, and this is an important conversation because his mixed race background doesn't come up a lot in the book, but here they allow him to comment on it and how it feels for him. And so Yuna does what she always does, which is tries to adjust the system that Shane is existing within. She suggests he loosen up with a glass of wine, try to be more flexible with his schedule, to deviate from his training schedule. But in her doing that, she breaks a rule she taught him to rely on, because even though Shane doesn't know he's autistic, routine and predictability are now essential to Shane. It feels destabilizing when the person who built the rules, which is Yuna, suddenly acts like they don't matter. And even though she wants to encourage Shane to have a life outside of hockey and fill it with exciting opportunities that he has earned, what comes out instead is a joke about sitting beside a Swedish princess. And it lands wrong for reasons she can't quite fully understand yet. But we can see in that scene that Yuna and David both sense something is off. But for Yuna, it would also feel like Shane is slipping away and further retreating into himself. And that might scare her more than she'd be willing to admit, because Yuna tries to almost bait Shane into going to Wimbledon by saying that he would be seated next to this Swedish princess. And she is putting his desire to not attend second to the persona he's trying to uphold. And this scene does double duty because it can be later interpreted as another moment where David and Yuna would likely pick up on the fact that Shane doesn't seem to have much interest in women when they mention them to him. When Yuna tells Shane, "I don't want you to lie, that's not who you are," she means that because as far as she knows, Shane has always been painfully honest in every aspect of his life. He's never given her any reason to believe he's not been honest with her. And this would be the first time where she may question that. But the dialogue here is important because also for the first time, Yuna's responses are implying that she might be wondering if the system she shaped Shane in might be hurting him too, which would be unbearable to her. Then Shane has a girlfriend. He meets Rose Landry. They immediately start dating. And so for Yuna and David, Shane would suddenly have a girlfriend who happens to be a famous actress. And this would likely feel like confirmation that all of the work Shane put into his career and into himself has worked, and all the ways she guided him too, because he is this thriving, loved, successful boy in all the ways the world understands, which is all she's ever wanted for him. And you can imagine that the conversation where Shane shares the news about Rose would have likely been one of necessity before the tabloids reported their romance all over the internet and all over the news. So Yuna would have been informed of the story before she was informed of Rose existing as a person of importance in Shane's life. That would largely imply that while they were getting to know each other, Shane did not share that with his mom. And Yuna used to be the person he told things to first. So she would be starting to adjust to a new norm where her 20-something-year-old son has his own life and his own relationship that he doesn't always share with her. For Yuna, as Shane's mother, she would want the person dating him to continue to pour into him the same way that she and David have. Yuna and David have been the only people to pour into Shane like that until he's seen abruptly dating Rose Landry, who is a person they don't know beyond her social status and celebrity and likely never meet. And this change in their roles would have likely been jarring for Yuna to realize that Shane does in fact have a life outside of her and David, after he has spent his entire life in their orbit and under their constant supervision. David, transversely, would have probably been thrilled, and by this point, supervising and caring for and organizing Shane's life is largely Yuna's identity. So if that pattern started to shift, it would feel destabilizing to her, because like Shane, she likes patterns. She likes predictability. She likes control. It's similar to how Shane is destabilized whenever Ilya's patterns start to shift. What's often forgotten about, I think, is Shane's accident and how it would have affected both Yuna and David. And we know that they would have gone to the hospital to be with him, and we know that they would have seen him there on those drugs the same way that he was with Ilya, which is completely unfiltered and unguarded. And in the show, Shane tells the medic on the ice, "Tell him I'm okay, he'll worry." And the medic says to Shane, his father will be getting a phone call. And Shane corrects him and says, not him, Ilya. And this is how we as the viewers would be able to identify that Shane's priorities are shifting, because where it was always his parents first, Ilya is now at the top of the list at that point in the story. And Shane is deeply layered, and much of the time he is masking himself from the world, trying to fit into the framework that Hockey and Yuna have created for him and set for him. And so when he's on these painkillers, it peels away the layers that he would have learned to build around himself, and he would have been behaving very childlike around Yuna again, like he was when he was small and he didn't need to have such a hard exterior. And no doubt that would make Yuna feel obviously immensely protective of him and reminiscent of him as a child, but she would also likely grieve how guarded he is now, comparatively. This version in the hospital is the version I think she wishes he could have been when talking to them at lunch in episode 4. Someone who's able to loosen up and enjoy things more, and Shane hasn't been this way for years, and that would be a hard realization for Yuna to grapple with. It would also push her and David further into wanting their son to find happiness with someone, whether that be Rose or someone else. And we see that in the book and in episode 5 when Shane talks to Rose and tells her that his mother has been asking about them and whether or not they're going to be getting back together. When the nurse would have mentioned that Ilya Rosanov visited Shane in the hospital, Yuna would only register that as a data point. It would be important to know and acknowledge, but it wouldn't be meaningful to her yet. And she has still bought into the narrative that her son and all of Montreal has maintained throughout his career, which is that Shane doesn't like him. And in the book, after Shane and Ilya met in the World Juniors in 2008, Shane had actually got back into the car with his parents, and when they asked him how Ilya was, Shane told them he was kind of an asshole. And so Yuna has really never had any reason to believe otherwise, as compounded by the way Ilya has this personified version of him in direct opposition to Shane in every way, and something Shane himself has never pushed back on or corrected her on either, is that they are rivals. So by the time we reach episode 5 and Scott Hunter comes out very publicly and absolutely undeniably, Yuna has suspected that her son, who is often alone and no longer dating Rose and keeps distance with his teammates and largely keeps to himself, may be gay. And beside her on the couch, the entire time he's been home since his injury, he has been lost in his phone texting someone. And when asked, he defaults to Hayden. But Hayden has 4 children. She would know that he cannot be texting Shane all day and night. So when Scott kisses Kip, and that kind of moment on screen happens, it would rearrange everything in Shane's life. And Yuna knows that because Shane is a professional hockey player. This is the first professional hockey player to come out in this way and to come out at all. And so Yuna has been thinking maybe Shane could be gay. This is a big deal. So when Shane runs out of the room to take the call, Yuna would acknowledge that something is happening without her. He is removing himself from the room so that she and David cannot overhear him. And he is keeping something private from them. She doesn't know what that is. She doesn't know what Shane thinks or feels about the situation because he is sharing less and less with them. And that would likely be painful for Yuna. When Shane then arrives at their cottage with Ilya, Yuna is put in this sort of role reversal with David because she's the one Shane is nervous to confront. She's the one Shane is bracing for impact with. And she's the one who initiates the conversation and asks, "Tell us what exactly?" She also is the one that looks at Ilya with this extremely defensive, protective demeanor because Ilya, again, is perceived as a threat. When Shane tells his parents that he is gay and that Ilya is visiting him, Yuna's internal narrative is likely flooded with questions. Why didn't he tell me? What did I do? What did I say? How did I not see this? Why did he not think he could tell me? Her immediate response is, "But you hate him." And Yuna is not asking this literally. She is trying to validate her own behavior within their rivalry. Her reality is now totally off base. Everything she thought about her son's own career is now suddenly flipped on his head because so much of Shane's career has been central to this rivalry with Ilya. So when Shane doubles down and tells his parents that he's in love with Ilya Rosanov, Yuna is trying to wrap her head around this moment, and it has less to do with Shane being gay and more to do with her not knowing that this rivalry was manufactured, and then having to reframe Shane's entire hockey career. And her love and support of Shane is very clear here because we see her touching his shoulder when she gets up from the table more than once. She very calmly tells him that this is something they might have been suspecting for a while. But in this scene, Yuna would be revising every memory, every assumption, every conversation she has had with Shane about Ilya. She'd be replaying every game he ever played against him in her head. And the show makes a really important change to the dialogue here because in the book, Yuna is the one who says, "We know you pretty well, Shane." Here, by giving that dialogue to David, it's almost reaffirming the way Yuna would be feeling, which is that she had devoted so much of herself to making sure that his life was insulated and protected and as successful as possible. And yet not knowing this part of him would feel like failure to her. Her focus being on building that framework had made her blind to things, but it had also made Shane so afraid of disappointing her that if he were to venture outside of that framework, she would be discouraged or upset. And if Shane has been living a lie, then Yuna must believe she is in some way the architect of it. So Yuna goes into distraction mode, getting up from the table, getting everyone a drink, And it shows us how she distracts herself whenever she's overwhelmed with emotions. And we have seen Shane do this when he's overwhelmed as well. And she puts her hand on his shoulder again as she walks past him, because again, this is more about her than it is about Shane. But he doesn't know that. And so over the course of their conversation at dinner, Yuna would be trying to figure out how she can control things and make them easier for Shane. And her first instinct is always going to be protect him and his legacy, the legitimacy of his career, and also the narrative of the rivalry, because fans and their two teams and the media have relied upon it for years. And so she starts to stress test Shane, because if Shane had ever softened the way he played against Ilya, or the outcome of certain games had been affected by him being in love with Ilya, then Shane's career could be reinterpreted entirely and his success would be brought into question. And those questions are a way for her to audit and retroactively reassess Shane's career in her own mind. But for her to imply that he would have let Ilya win would be very cutting, because like Yuna, Shane is built on excellence and discipline, and so the implication that he is not those things because he loves Ilya would be deeply offensive. Winning is fundamental to her identity, and Shane got that from her. And Yuna also knows that the parameters Shane is existing within are unthinkably challenging. Hockey culture has a long-standing and narrow idea of what being a hockey player is supposed to look like, one that no doubt she had encouraged Shane to abide by, and he was already a step behind being Asian Canadian in a predominantly white sport. Hockey is considered a blue-collar sport. It is largely inaccessible, and before Shane's ever drafted, he does not fit the mold of a hockey player prototype. They are stoic, they are tough, they are emotionally restrained. It's why he meditates, it's why he does yoga. It's also understandable that he becomes very emotionally restrained the older he gets and the further into hockey he advances. It's also why he follows strict regimes and diet. He is the captain of the oldest team in the league with a decades-long rivalry with Boston, and Ilya sits as the face of that team. Shane is the face of the franchise, and as captain, his leadership would be called into question anytime that team underperforms. And Yuna knows that any player that ventures outside of the lines of the franchise and the league's expectations would receive backlash. But a player on Montreal, the captain of Montreal, being gay is already a venture outside those lines. But being in love with the captain of Boston is a whole other thing entirely. And in hockey, the fans feel like they are owed a lot from their teams. Fans who would have invested emotionally, financially to attend these games between them, who have generationally given into that long-standing Boston and Montreal rivalry with one another, who followed these teams throughout their lives, they would feel like they were duped. The idea that the two captains and central figures within that rivalry did not share in the same emotional reality as the fans would feel destabilizing for a lot of them. I think learning that a core belief as a fan was actually performative would lead them to go back and rewatch old games and look for signs, or reinterpret moments like the All-Star Game kiss, or moments of sportsmanship that might be now seen as deceptive. They would start watching interviews and analyzing body language under a microscope, and Yuna would know, because Yuna is one of those fans. She says at the beginning of the show that hockey is one of the ways that she learned to feel Canadian. It's given her a community and an identity to align with, and much like how Scott in episode 3 expressed that hockey became his family when his parents died, the culture of the sport facilitates that. The culture she bought into and brought her son into and built him up within can now be the exact thing that can hurt him the most. And it already has, and so has she. And she let those biases make her blind to her own son and judge the man that her son loves in a way that she is beginning to see as totally unfair. And she asks so many hard questions of Ilya, of their timeline, of his intentions with their relationship, because she wants reassurance, but also because she's desperately trying to defend her own reality. When Shane and Ilya are answering David's question about how they plan to keep doing this until they retire, and Yuna says, "Oh no, that's sad," this is her saying the quiet part out loud. Shane tells her that they can't just come out and announce it, which is him setting a boundary or a rule with his parents and also with Ilya by trying to manage the risk, just like Yuna does. It's only when Shane and Ilya both admit to themselves and to Yuna and David that they've only ever been in love with one person, which is each other, and have been doing this quietly, secretly, since they were 18 years old, that Yuna's emotions win over her, and she has to leave the table and go outside because Yuna has done nothing but love her son and support him, and yet it has led to this outcome where he's been hurting for nearly a decade and could not go to her for comfort or for help. And this backlash is also something that she cannot insulate Shane from. And that reflection could very quickly become self-loathing because she has let him down and made him feel unsafe to confide in her. And despite her best intentions, there has been deep damage caused by her actions, and it would be harder to rectify those emotions because none of that damage was intentional. In fact, she had gone out of her way to prevent this very thing from happening to her own son by the outside world. And so when Shane says, "I tried," that breaks her because Yuna has always valued effort and sacrifice and discipline, and now she sees that the greatest effort her son has ever made was not on the ice, but in living a self-sacrificing life that keeps everyone else around him comfortable and puts him last. It wouldn't be until Shane tells Yuna that he really did try that she would understand the depths of that damage and that her demands of discipline and mental toughness and resilience and fitting into this mold would have boxed him in his own mind so deeply that he was afraid to share himself fully with himself and his own parents, and that their unit of three that has been so foundational for all of them did not feel like a safe haven for him to retreat to when dealing with these very real fears that he has had of being gay in a sport that does not invite it. And this is, I think, in some small way, what helps Yuna to let go of the idea that loving Shane has to mean shaping him and trying to control so many areas of his life. Loving him now means listening to what he needs and then executing on that. And so she jumps into planning mode because that is what she does when there is a problem. It's what she's always done. It's also what Shane does and did with Ilya in the same finale episode. But now when Shane course corrects her at the table and tells her that he doesn't want to come out yet and that he and Ilya just want a future, Yuna is willing to meet him where he is and not force Shane to where she thinks he should be. Then you think about the fact that Ilya Rozanov is in her house, eating her food, drinking her husband's vodka, and existing in front of her not as a persona or an abstraction, but as a real person who loves her son, who is claiming that his career comes second to his love for her son. And she would then watch Shane slipping into a panic attack, and Ilya calms him very quickly and easily, and it would be a display of the very deep trust and emotional security and safety that Shane has found within Ilya. And she would be watching Ilya understand Shane's anxiety spiral. And when David and Yuna prepare to intervene, we see Yuna freeze like Shane so often does, which to me would imply that perhaps in the past, anytime Shane might have been anxious before, Yuna was not the one to provide that type of comfort, or at least not comfort him in this particular way. And that is not to say that she was wrong in that. I think Yuna tried to manage Shane's anxiety externally by controlling as much of the world around him as she could, rather than go into the anxiety with him and help him come out of it. Whereas Ilya loves Shane from within his anxiety. He doesn't try to change Shane to fit within the world around him. He reframes and reshapes the world around Shane so that he can breathe inside of that anxiety. This relationship between Ilya and Shane has been happening for near a decade, and this is not a phase. This is not confusion. Ilya admits he's never loved anyone else but Shane, and Shane has reciprocated that. Ilya has committed to being with Shane, moving his whole life. He's in love. They're in love. And David and Yuna have only ever wanted that for their son. And they would want to sing that from the rooftops and proudly support and proclaim that this is who their son actually is, and this is the partner that he's chosen. And I think that that's obvious, that they are so happy that Shane has finally found someone who loves him like they do and wants to take care of him, but they can't share that with the world yet. David and Yuna's secrecy is necessary still. And I think that's what helps Yuna understand clearly that Shane was hiding to protect the one relationship where he has felt understood. And that included hiding from her. And yes, a large part of it was also to protect himself as he worked through his feelings and his sexuality, and to protect his career and the reputation that he and Yuna have spent his whole life building and shaping and perfecting. But now he has a relationship that also needs to be protected so that it cannot be ruined by the outside world. And that hurts. And Yuna is determined to protect it too. So when we see Yuna standing on her steps, planning to meet her son and his boyfriend for dinner tomorrow at 5 o'clock, and saying that she will text first and respecting his boundary and his request for privacy, it's because she has made peace with the fact that she is not going to be the architect of his future now, but his mom, who is following his lead for the first time. And Yuna will stumble and she will fall as she tries to figure out how to best support him and Ilya, but she is willing to adjust to that new normal and invites it. And we see her relationship with Ilya a lot more in the long game, and that growth is really important. And I hope that Jacob writes some really beautiful scenes between Ilya and Yuna and Ilya and David, because Yuna and Shane are so similar that I think Ilya and her can learn a lot from one another. And we see Ilya and Shane go through some situations in the long game where Yuna's influence and support is very important. And so understanding where she's coming from and how she plays a role in that is going to be really pivotal going into season 2. I think Yuna's portrayal as a parent who tries their best and does everything from the utmost position of love and support and wanting to do right by their child, and still having an outcome where their kid is indirectly hurt by their actions, is a very human experience. And I think that in particular, the addition of the scene between Yuna and Shane does a great job of painting that dynamic and how that very often is the case with parents and children. I also think that there are a lot of arguments to be made about Yuna having a lot of her behaviors stem from her Asian background. I think that's a huge component of it as well. Some people are wondering if maybe she might be neurodivergent as well, given that we know that Shane is, and that a lot of their behaviors and ways of thinking mirror one another. I think, again, the beauty of this character and any character in any book or TV show or movie is that you can bring your own personal experience to that character and find elements of them that you align with or identify closely with. And I think Yuna is one of those really great examples of that. I think if you're a parent, you can identify with the way she parents. If you were a kid, you can identify with the way she parents because it might feel familiar to you. I know that for me, as an athlete, having a parent that really emphasizes your career and how you present yourself and how you show up to your sport every day, that's very, very common in competitive sports. I think pinning her against someone like David as her partner in life is a really great parallel to Shane and Ilya, because I really firmly believe that Ilya and David are very, very similar to one another, and the show does a great job of fleshing that out more than the book does. But on the whole, I think that the relationship that Yuna has with Shane informs Shane as a person. And so when you know that he is molded in this pressure cooker environment, but the pressure cooker environment is entirely based on Yuna's desire to give Shane the best life he can possibly have because she loves him so very deeply, it gives everybody the ability to have a lot more grace for her and understand that life is going to be that gray area where you can do right by someone and still have opportunities to hurt them, even if it's not on purpose. The important thing is that both Yuna and David are represented as very understanding parents who are willing to listen to Shane and do what he needs of them. They're very accepting, supportive, kind. I think the show representation of them only amplifies what's already there in the source material as well. And that's important because we model culture off of art, and shows like this are really fundamental in putting conversations like those in front of our screens and inciting broader conversations with our own peers and family members as well. Also, the relationship dynamic between Yuna and David, because I think that the show and the book flips a lot of the norms on their head with the two of them. Yuna breaks a lot of gender norms, and so do the other female characters in the show, and I think that that's an important discussion to be had. Yuna is the hockey fan, and David is not the typical hockey dad, and I think that that's really brilliant, especially as a hockey player. I deeply appreciated that change. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I think she's a really compelling character and a really pivotal part of the story for someone who has such little screen time. She makes a huge impact on the way that this story plays out, and I think that that's the sign of a really well-written, fully fleshed out character, is with what limited time they have on our screens, they leave a very lasting impact, and she certainly does that in this show. As always, thank you so much for tuning in and talking with me about this show again, and character development and what that looks like. And I so deeply appreciate you listening, and I will see you all in our next chat.